I got stuck in a cabin on a snowy winter night. What I witnessed can't be of this world. I grew up treasuring nature so much. If I went to the woods, fishing, or in the mountains, the tranquility these experiences brought with them had no match. Some were even ethereal. I could feel Mother Nature living and breathing, always ensuring I had everything I needed while stepping on its rich grounds. Last year, I bought a cabin up in the mountains. I have always liked to disconnect from the city in the cold winter and just go to a place that feels like magic. This cabin had the feeling of being somewhere in that realm. Excitement took over me when I thought I finally had my own place in the snowy mountains, away from the city, away from work, and from people who make so much noise that sometimes I just need a little breather. So the acquisition of the log cabin couldn't have come at a better time. With my head almost exploding and my mind fogged with the dullest things and the most mundane tasks possible at work, I couldn't wait for a few days to recharge my batteries. With no other than my trusted associate, my daring sidekick, and my best friend, the Irish setter Blaze, who had just turned 6 years old, I decided to pack all the things needed and go. I drove for almost 3 hours. The trees hung heavy with snow, and the flakes fell slowly on the ground. I felt like being in a fairy tale, a vastness of white that conquered all the old land for miles and miles in front of my eyes. I stopped the car somewhere along the way to get fresh water from a spring that ran through the frozen woods. The sight was a spectacle, and I couldn't help but drink. It was so cold, I felt my chest turning to ice, yet it was so refreshing. So I took a few gallons with me for the cabin so Blaze and I wouldn't get dehydrated. I reached the cabin in the afternoon. The temperature began dropping as nightfall approached. I had maybe 2 hours tops of daylight. I parked the car, took the supplies and food inside, turned on the generator, grabbed some firewood, and threw it into the fireplace. I poured some gasoline over, and the flame engulfed the logs. After that, I began shoveling the snow on the front porch and around the house. I also took my hunting rifle because I thought a rabbit stew wouldn't hurt anyone. I always liked it, and Blaze liked it too. Time passed quickly enough, and after finishing all the chores, the time came to go inside and make some food. I had some canned dog food for Blaze, and as I felt my stomach growling, the mouth-watering image of sausage and eggs on toast came to mind. I lit some candles to make the ambiance more pleasant. I also turned on a lantern, and everything seemed to be perfect. Night fell over the isolated cabin, and the winter winds howled outside over the infinite blanket of snow. Shadows danced on the walls like little devils. The crackling wood sang its song, bringing peace to my tired mind. The cabin felt like a gift from God. I had no television to distract me and didn't check the internet. I only kept my cell phone with me as a precautionary measure because accidents could have happened. Even though the reception had been pretty bad, it still allowed to call 911. After finishing eating, I enjoyed a beer and a book. I fell asleep in an instant, poof, just like that. The fresh air has had this effect on me ever since I was a kid. The book fell from my lap and thudded on the floor. I instantly jolted awake and saw Blaze looking at the door. He stood still, mildly growling. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked. I could see he was trembling both with anger and fear. He began nervously barking. I had never seen him like that before. Outside, in the howling wintry winds, I heard some sort of static sound combined with a low, gurgling sound. It was as if someone was zapping through a broken TV, where one channel was just annoying static, and the next was unspeakable monsters raging. I peeked outside and saw nothing. Then I grabbed my rifle and wanted to open the door and check it out in person. Yet, Blaze wouldn't let me do that. Instead, he stood before the door, barking at me this time. Whatever roamed outside, Blaze felt it necessary to let me know if I went there. I would have found only death. "What the hell is that thing out there? God damn it!" I whispered to myself. I glanced outside the window again, and I thought I saw a shadowy figure looking at the cabin. It looked back and then went out of sight. Blaze barked as loud as his lungs could take it. "Blaze, come here, boy! Get here now!" I called him. The only weak point was the window. If whatever was outside wanted to jump through like a beast, I said let it have it. I would have put 2 bullets between its eyes in seconds. Blaze would have probably eaten the whole thing in one big, fat meal. The static and gurgling sounds never ceased, even though the creature had vanished. I rechecked the window. Nothing. I only heard those damned sounds. After a while, a large band came from the door, and then it came again, repeatedly. It shook, and I got my gun ready to shoot. If that door had fallen, the death of whatever was on the side would have been swift. "Hey, man, open up. These things outside will kill me, please," the voice of a scared man said. He kept banging on the door as if his life depended on it. And it did. If I didn't act fast, the poor man would have been mauled to death by whatever beasts roamed the old mountain. "Hold up! I'm coming!" I cried. I had to help that poor man. He was probably lost, scared, alone, and dehydrated. Blaze jumped in front of the door. He barked at me again, pushing me back. Something was wrong if he did that. "Come on, man. Just open the goddamn door already, will ya?" He banged again. Blaze kept on barking violently. "Sorry, hoss." "No can do," I replied, understanding that this was something else, not a man. I trusted Blaze more than I trusted myself. He was one brave and intelligent dog, a true friend and companion. The beast howled, and I heard its voice changing as it drowned. It coughed, it spat, and I thought it was asphyxiating. "Sweetie, can you please open up for Mama? I have a gift for you. It took me so long to find you, and I want to give it to you," my mother's voice said. "What the?" I said, almost dropping the rifle from my hands. My mom died when I was just a kid, and except for her warm smile, the voice was the only other thing I remembered about her. Then banging noises came from around the house, as if the number of creatures outside had grown exponentially. I had gone there expecting to find paradise in solitude. But it turns out hell had frozen over in that exact place. Nothing natural and of this world could have made those noises and then mimicked my dead mother's voice. Again, I checked the situation outside. The shadowy creatures had grown in numbers. I counted 12 of them. 6 just stood motionless, while the other 6 growled, snarled, and howled in the dead of night. I saw one of them coming closer to the window, and went a few steps back. It glued its dead eyes to the window. It didn't have a nose, just 2 small holes. Its mouth was a straight horizontal line. It opened it and sucked on the window. In doing so, it revealed small rows of sharp teeth. "Why don't you open up for your dear old grandfather?" "It's cold outside, sonny boy," the creature snarled. Grandpa died too when I was just a kid. After my mom's death, he had a heart attack because he couldn't cope with her being gone. I just looked at it as it mimicked my grandfather's voice. I don't know how the hell it knew my mom's or my grandfather's voice, but it happened. Maybe it read my mind and browsed my memories. Maybe by doing so, it extracted their voices from my head. Hell, this sounded crazy as hell to me, but what I had witnessed shouldn't have been possible. And, just seeing that craziness, every scenario I thought of might have been likely. The glass began to crack under the pressure of the creature's face. But fortunately, I had parked the Jeep right in front of the house, so that I might have just made a run for it. The banging all across the house intensified, and I felt the pressure of death clawing my heart. The window would give in soon, so I said to hell with it. Instead, I pointed the rifle straight at the ugliness and pulled the trigger. It blasted its head into millions of pieces, and everything stopped. "Blaze, we're gonna make a run for it, buddy," I said, hoping for the both of us to escape that mess. I grabbed a burning piece of wood from the fireplace with one and busted through the door. The shadowy creatures had even grown in numbers, probably 20 or 30 of them. Blaze barked, foaming at the mouth. "William, William, William," a raspy voice said. It was alien to me, not similar to anyone I knew. I turned around and saw them all gathered in a herd, waiting to attack. "Stay back," I said, threatening them with the torching wood. They hissed and collectively stepped back. I threw the wood at them, and they scattered in an instant. I opened the car door for Blaze to go in, and he immediately jumped in the passenger's seat. A pair of claws grabbed my ankle from under the Jeep and pulled me. It caused me to fall, and I saw the abomination crawling up on my leg. I hit it in the head with the butt of the rifle. Then, when it hissed with its horrible mouth, I put the barrel in it and shot. It blew its brain out on the side of my car. I hit the ignition, and the car came to life. Blaze was agitated and scared. I patted him on the head and told him it would be all right. I pushed the pedal to the metal and ran over those creatures, feeling their skulls crack under the wheels. A few hours later, I was back in my apartment with Blaze. It was quiet. Maybe the city wasn't so bad after all. This happened last year. A few weeks after the incident, I received an anonymous message saying, "Hello, William. You need to come back to the cabin. There are urgent matters that I need to talk to you about. I am one of your neighbors. Sincerely, Thomas." I did remember seeing a few houses on my way up there, but didn't think to stop. Also, the former owner had vanished into thin air. I didn't go back yet. Maybe somewhere in the future. Maybe. Who knows? Story 2. In this village, December is the scariest month of the year, tonight. I have a wonderful opportunity to share some local folklore with the world. These old stories are often unsettling, of course, but they sometimes hide a lesson that folk would do well not to forget. Unfortunately, those like my mother who doesn't know English and has never used a computer are often the only ones who still remember. She's sitting down in front of the tall red candle now, which means the tale is about to begin. I will type and translate as she speaks, and I can't imagine a better environment for this dark winter fable. The cabin is quiet, and outside are only snowdrifts, pine forests, and icy mountaintops beneath a starry night sky. And so, without further ado, the outsider's tale. Hundreds of years ago, This village was a very different place than it is today. Each person had their place. There were butchers and bakers and candlestick makers, blacksmiths, grocers, coopers, and carpenters. Folk supported each other because they depended on each other. They understood, like the spider understands, that if one strand of the web fails, the dinner escapes. And who wants to go hungry? That also meant that neighbors kept a close eye on each other, since one person's sin was the sin of the whole community. And that's how our story begins. One winter's day, an outsider came to the village. Suddenly, there was a new person in town, one who had no place. She came up the winding road in a covered wagon, fleeing death and danger. She needed help, but folk are suspicious of outsiders. She had to find a way to support herself until summer, when the snow would melt and she could cross the mountain pass. She tried playing music in the local tavern, but the barkeep turned her out. He was sorry, he said, but the wives in town didn't like the way their husbands looked at the outsider. She tried working the looms and storehouses, but the outsider's hands were delicate, and she did not know the language of the village. She couldn't share in their gossip, which made her a threat. They turned her out as well. Snow piled up on her cold-covered wagon. The outsider took on the most disagreeable jobs in order to survive. She mucked stables, swept streets, and cleaned houses for next to nothing. But it still wasn't enough to provide food and warmth for the winter. She resorted to meaner things: fortune-telling, potion-selling, card scams. And each night, the men of the village snuck over to the covered wagon with a pitiful handful of coins. They brushed their steps out of the snow with a pine branch to protect their reputations. But everyone knew what happened in the outsider's covered wagon. One of these men was different from the others. He was the butcher, and he brought gifts of food and fuel instead of coins. It wasn't clear what he was after. Maybe he just wanted someone to talk to, because he wasn't happy in the village either. The butcher and the outsider grew close, and they made plans to leave the village together as soon as the passes cleared. Rumors traveled fast in the village. The butcher's family and friends were furious about his plot to abandon them. What right did he have to abandon his place in the village? Folk depended on him. It could not be allowed, and they knew that the outsider was to blame. They did not know that the butcher was with the outsider on the night they set flame to her covered wagon. He came out in his shirt sleeves to stop them, and things got violent. The butcher was left in a pool of his own blood beside the burning wagon, and the outsider ran, screaming, into the mountains and into the night. There was no food or shelter in those freezing high places, and the outsider was no survivalist. She did the best she could, digging a branch-covered tunnel to sleep in, eating roots and berries, but the berries made her sick, and soon the outsider realized she was going to die. But she could not allow that to happen. It was already obvious when she looked at her shivering, starving belly. The outsider carried the butcher's child in her womb. A desperate madness took hold of the outsider. She climbed to the top of a twisted peak, and there, surrounded by the howling wind and absolute darkness of a new moon winter's night, she called upon any power that could hear her. She offered everything and asked for only two things: life and revenge. Well, something out there must have been listening, because she was granted both. The outsider and her kin would live, but on the opposite side of the cycle. The folk of the village craved warmth and light. The outsider and her kin would thrive in dark and cold. The folk of the village grew old and dreaded death. The outsider and her kin would age slowly and fear no mortal weapon. The folk of the village felt hunger and thirst. The outsider and her kin would need nourishment, but once per year, and it would come from the flesh of the living. And so it was, and is. When the winter nights are longest, the outsider and her kin come down from the frozen peaks to hunt. It is always a mystery who the prey will be. It might be a foolish, misbehaving child who didn't heed his mother's warnings to come inside at dark. Cold hands that grab his neck from behind are the last thing he ever feels. It might be a stubborn farmer out fixing his fence by the dark tree line. A scream, fingernails dragging in the frosty dirt, and he's gone. Swallowed up by the shadows under the trees as though he'd never been born. Or it might be someone special, who the outsiders have stalked in the night for many moons. The folk of this village aren't always eaten where they're caught. That would be too messy. Some are dragged away by the outsiders for breeding purposes, to create more of their own kind. Others are just used for sport. After they've served their purpose, the glacial caves keep their meat fresh all year long. The village has changed since the outsider first arrived in her covered wagon. There are electric lights and metal towers, plastics, escalators, and wireless internet. The village has grown, but the folk are very much the same. Pray for the outsiders. And so every year, when the days grow shorter and the nights are cold, the people of this village stay indoors after sunset. Folk lock their doors, shutter their windows, and light a tall red candle in remembrance of their sin. Folk try to forget about all the folk who go missing this time of year, because the outsiders are always there, full of life and full of revenge. So ends the tale. My mother blows out the candle that the inhabitants of this cabin had lit, foolishly thinking it would protect them from us. We have feasted well, but we must go now. It is nearly dawn. Perhaps I'll have another story to tell when we come down again to feed next year. Story 3. There is something not right about this winter. I can't say much about it, but I live in the Midwest. Honestly, that should tell you enough because there isn't much to say. If you don't know what the Midwest is or haven't visited our vast amount of corn and soybean fields, count yourself lucky. There's nothing here, just miles of farmland sporadically dotted with copses of trees. Of course there's prairies, forest preserves, and a few national parks and all that stuff. But the Midwest is the most boring stretch of land between mountain ranges that could ever exist. I've lived here my whole life, and honesty, the place is a nightmare. We have flash flooding in the spring, and a Category 3 tornado is one of those things that we kind of shrug at and say, well, it sucks, but at least it didn't happen to us. We get weird summers with sun that bakes the earth and makes asphalt, give off heat waves that could engulf a person. Honestly, the fall is the most peaceful time we get here, where the leaves change colors and the air is crisp like apple skins and ripe with possibilities. But the real kicker is the winter. The winter is a crapshoot. It could be a nice 40 degrees one week, and then the next, the high is 4 without wind chill. We can get no snow, and then suddenly a foot appears overnight. And it's not that fluffy powder snow you get in the mountains. This is heavy, dense lake-effect snow that buries your car. Your driveway is ice. Your house is ice. Everything is ice. But you still have to drive to work because, hey, it's the Midwest. The winters have always been like this because, like I said, I've lived here in this seemingly godless place for my entire existence. I'm an expert on this stuff. Flooding like we need to build an ark, followed by baking in dry but also humid heat, followed by a few months of good weather ending with the ominous phrase, "Winter is coming." We see you, Winterfell. We know what's going on. That being said, though, there's something really freaking weird about this winter. I can't explain it to you. Maybe it was the late snowfall or the general shifting of the temperature, but something feels off. Something feels wrong. I've tried talking to my family about it, but it's more of the same. Oh, the weather is always like this. Oh, come on, it's just a weird year. But that's the thing. It's been an incredibly strange year. All the other seasons felt relatively mild, like there was some absence in definition. Spring, summer, and fall all blended into each other almost seamlessly. It's like the chaotic energy that kept the seasons apart and defined them was suddenly gone. Temperatures were stable and easygoing. I mean, we still had our rough days, but this year was almost a cakewalk compared to the past few. I can't even blame global warming because that's a gradual thing, as much as we can say that. This was so suddenly not irregular that it was alarming, and it seemed like nobody noticed. I mean, I noticed. I honestly don't know how to explain how bone-chillingly wrong winter has felt this year. The wind feels like something ancient passing over my town, whispering through trees and breathing between houses. There's a sense of dread that happens when the sun goes down, and for some reason, the sky is still light gray. I know that's light pollution being reflected back from the clouds, but there is something so unnerving about seeing the sky light enough at 2 a.m. You can see the shadows of naked tree branches against it. It's otherworldly, horrifying, and mystical all at the same time. Like I'm seeing something that I was never meant to know about. I feel like I'm trespassing on something much older and much worse than could be explained. And for some ungodly reason, the night feels hungry. It feels ominous and awake, in the exact way the rest of the year felt quiet. Of course, naturally, nobody else really notices this, because nobody else I know is an insomniac like me, and is actually up at the witching hour to peer through the window to watch the street. The world is so utterly still that the alarms are beginning to ring in the back of my head. But it's also so still and quiet that I feel like I'm overreacting. That this is just me projecting life insecurities onto an unstable world climate. That this is just an exhausted 26-year-old dealing with living on their own for the first time and clutching at reasons for things to not feel right. And I told myself this every night for the last week, up until last night at 3 a.m. when the frost started creeping down the street. Here's the thing. I know frost spreads out. I've seen it happen on my windshield pretty much every freaking year. That is not how this happened. It crawled down the street like mist with legs, slowly gaining ground. I watched it as it moved by on fingers of ice, pulling itself along like a centipede. It just kept going. It went down my street and creeped onto the sidewalk, claiming space and settling in. My breath fogged up the glass, and I looked on in horror as it slowly walked its way up my window. Normal frost spreads in veins or fractals, but this was something else. When it touched the glass, it spread and then grew right back up into the moving ice. It was like it was alive. Scratch that. I could feel it like it was alive. The air pulsed cold from the window, as if the ice had given it a heartbeat. I backed out of the room slowly and went back to the safety of my bed. I was warm in there. I was safe from whatever it was that was outside. I waited until this morning to check on it. I waited until that pale sun was up in the sky to look out there. The frost was gone, and somehow that was worse than seeing it there in the first place. I checked the weather, the news, read it. Whatever and wherever someone might have been awake to document it. Any Googling I did sent me to creeping ice, which was a lake effect ice thing. I know what that is. I've seen that. I live 20 miles from Lake Michigan. Feel free to search it yourself, because it looks about right, but it's also nothing like what I saw. There was nothing. In fact, last night was supposed to be 34 degrees, and frost might have formed. But there was no way ice would have held around least of all multiplied itself in front of my eyes. I have to go to work today, and I'm dreading leaving my apartment. Not because I'm cold, not because I'm scared, which for the record I'm very freaked out, but because something feels even more wrong today. Something about how bright it is and how nice out it looks makes me think I'm in for something horrible. But we'll see. Maybe I'm just making a big deal out of nothing. I'll let you guys know if anything else happens. Hopefully, this is my only post about this. Story 4. There was a reason why my neighbor's Halloween decorations always looked so realistic. I absolutely used to love Halloween. Not only dressing up as my favorite scary character, making horror-themed food, or putting up decorations. No, I loved the atmosphere that filled our neighborhood, as it changed from its boring demeanor into something horrifying and exciting. My neighbor and best friend Mark was an even bigger fanatic than myself. Each year, he'd try to make the best costume or scariest decoration. But despite our best efforts at becoming the Halloween kings, we could never match up to Mr. Black. Mr. Black was a man of advancing age. He'd been widowed about a decade earlier, left behind by a vicious, evil wife that treated the entire neighborhood like crap. The only thing she ever loved was Halloween, and she'd make damn sure all the attention was directed at herself each year on October 31st. When she died, I almost felt relieved for the poor man. Still, for reasons beyond my comprehension, he decided to keep his abusive wife's tradition alive. Each year, he'd come up with the most gruesome display of nightmare-inducing decoration. His entire house would be transformed into one of absolute mind-bending horror. He'd build a pool of blood in his garden, or he'd cover the entire house with cobwebs, unleashing a horde of spiders just to prove that he could. It was as beautiful as it was disgusting. How he constantly managed to outdo himself brought great joy to the rest of the neighborhood. Unfortunately, Mark couldn't stand it. He's a damn attention seeker. Always has to be in the spotlight. Every fucking Halloween. For years, Mark had tried to outdo Mr. Black. He'd spend thousands of dollars in preparation, planning for months ahead of time, only to be blown out of the water by Mr. Black. What was even weirder was that each time, it would only take Mr. Black a day to set everything up. which enraged Mark beyond anything else in life. In 2017, Mark even resorted to renting animatronics that resembled crawling corpses. He littered his yard with the things, letting them scream and pull themselves around. He was so confident that year. And, even as the 30th of October rolled around, Mr. Black still hadn't put up any decorations. When we went to work the next day, on Halloween itself, Mark was beyond himself with joy. He'd finally done it, and he just wouldn't shut up about it. It wasn't until we got home later that day, before we saw the horrors taking place in Mr. Black's front yard. In the span of 8 hours, he'd turned it into a literal graveyard. Muffled screams were coming up from the ground, with bells that were attached to strings, leading into buried coffins. They rang as people gathered around, in awe from the sight. Those brave enough to traverse his yard were invited inside for a tour. Mark and I joined, and quickly realized that Mark's pathetic animatronics were nothing in comparison. Because inside the living room, Mr. Black had created a makeshift morgue, full on with mortuary refrigerators that rumbled around as if people were trapped inside. Mark was pissed. He couldn't believe it, and to be fair, neither could I. He swore then that he'd figure out how the hell Mr. Black managed to pull off these incredible feats each and every year at such an advancing age, and without any help. How does he do it? Have you ever seen any trucks or workmen outside his house? Mark asked. I chuckled. Nah, but come on. He's retired. He probably gets it done while we're at work. Still, Mark didn't believe it. That guy's up to something. Next year I'm going to stay at home and figure it out. A year passed, and Mark actually remained true to his word. On the 31st of October, 2018, he called in sick to work. I sighed once I found out, surprised at how seriously he was taking it. Then, at around noon, I got a frantic and excited voice message from Mark. I knew it. I freaking knew it. You won't believe what I just found. Mr. Black is a depraved monster. I'm going to call the voice message was cut short, so I tried to call back. No response. After the 5th or so missed call, I started to get worried. There was absolutely no way Mark would have given me any peace if he'd truly found something. But no matter how many times I tried to call him, I just got a busy signal. By the end of the workday, I was truly scared for him. Mark was never that silent. I needed to figure out what was going on. As soon as I returned home, I went over to Mark's place, where I proceeded to hammer on his door. His wife was the one to answer, and she too seemed worried. Elise, is Mark here? She frowned. He went out to run some errands a few hours ago, but I haven't heard from him since. I thought maybe his phone died, but he should have been back home by now. Mark hadn't told her about his plan to investigate Mr. Black, mostly because she would have been pissed. But I had to come clean. If he was truly missing, we needed to call the police. While Elise explained the situation to the cops, I went over to talk to Mr. Black myself. It was already getting late. Both children and adults had gathered in front of his house, ready for the yearly tour of horror. That year, his yard had been turned into a field of tall grass. It was so dense we could hardly see his front door. All we could see amid the field were makeshift scarecrows. Mr. Black hadn't let anything go to waste. As we entered his yard, the air filled with the stench of rotting flesh. It wasn't unusual for him to utilize all 5 senses, but this was extreme. Mr. Black, do you have a moment? I asked. "In a minute, old friend. After the tour," he just shouted back, as he led the people inside his home. I remained outside, disturbed by the odd smell. I moved some of the grass apart to inspect the scarecrows. They were horrifying, covered in old rags with bits and pieces of skin visible through the holes. They didn't even look like props. After a moment of hesitation, I reached out to pull off the scarecrow's mask. What I saw sent me falling to the ground in shock. That scarecrow wasn't a prop, nor a doll. It was an actual corpse. "Oh, God!" was all I managed to get out as I stared at the decomposing body. Once I'd partially regained my senses, I started checking the other scarecrows. Most of them were beyond rotten skeletal corpses that had perished long ago. But once I reached the last one, I immediately recognized the clothes. With a trembling hand, I reached to take off the mask. It was Mark. His throat had been slit, and he'd been turned into a flesh-filled scarecrow. I stood before the body of my former best friend in shock. All these years, Mr. Black had created what seemed like impossibly realistic decorations. It had all been real. The blood, the cadavers, the screaming. We'd all been oblivious to it. The police arrived shortly after, alerted by Mark's wife. They quickly stormed the house and escorted all the guests outside. But Mr. Black himself was gone. He was never seen again. I don't celebrate Halloween anymore, nor does anyone else in my neighborhood. For us, the 31st of October is just a painful memory of what we let happen under our noses. But if you see a new neighbor with decorations that seem just a tad too realistic, stay away from them. It might be Mr. Black.